Hello, everyone. Welcome to Yachting International Radio. You're with Corinne from the Crew Coach. I'm laughing because it says live, and I really hope it's not live. But anyway, let's just see where it takes us. You're very lucky if you are watching this live because we have a very experienced. How would I actually describe your title? I know what you do, but it's a very unique and specialized trade, Kristie. So
Look, I think easiest probably just to say workplace investigator and conflict resolution practitioner.
Fascinating. So did you have to study something in particular to be able to practice in this field, or did you study organizational psychology, HR?
It's an interesting role in investigations. A lot of it ends up being on the job, and I spent a lot of my career working in state and federal government in Australia doing regulatory investigations. There is a government investigations qualification that you can complete, which I obviously have completed. But then it's a bit of a choose your own adventure in terms of what part of investigations you decide to practice in.
Okay, brilliant. So you do know a little bit about the super yacht industry, and I think you're quite horrified to learn that we don't have a resource like yourself within our industry. So I think it'd be quite important to dive in. Firstly, let's educate our audience with regards to what workplace grievances look like and the mediation process. What we have within our industry that's very, very common is bullying. There's also discrimination, there's sexual harassment and assault. So I have no doubt your strategies that you use land-based would be appropriate and effective within the super yacht industry. So Kristie, where would be the best part to begin in terms of discussing what that looks like?
I think firstly, what I'll say is this industry certainly isn't alone. I think that there are few, if any, industries that don't experience some of these issues to varying degrees. And look, when we first had our conversation, Karina and I was a bit gobsmacked in terms of understanding, I suppose, the complexities around the industry that you operate in, and obviously dealing with, you know, in international waters or various different legislative frameworks in different countries where all of your crew and industry operate. It does make it quite a complex environment. But I think at the end of the day, when you boil it down, bullying, discrimination, harassment, it ends up being relatively garden variety. There are certain, I suppose, common themes that you see no matter what industry you're in. And at the end of the day, what they come down to really is behaviours in a workplace. And I think you can look at, for example, if you're in Australia or if you're interested in Australian law, you can look at, you know, the definitions on Fair Work Australia. They've got all the definitions around what is harassment, what is bullying, what is sexual harassment, if that's something that you're interested in. But I think that really what it comes down to is an employer does have, I suppose, both a lot of the time a legal and a moral obligation to make sure their employees are safe at work. And that means that there is a requirement for an employee to provide an environment that is free from bullying, free from harassment, free from sexual harassment, free from sexual assault, free from physical assaults, all that kind of thing. And what that looks like is having appropriate policies and procedures in place and ensuring that they're enforced. And enforcement isn't necessarily about coming down with a big stick on your employees. Sometimes it's about having quality conversations. You asked about grievances. Grievances can look like many different things. Generally, though, a grievance, you know, they can be large or small. A grievance might be something relatively minor. That's just about possibly a bit of a misunderstanding. We might have some conflicting priorities in play. Or you may have a very significant grievance where over a number of years somebody may perceive or feel that they have been bullied, harassed by one individual, by a group of individuals. So grievances can, I suppose, they can run the entire gamut in terms of the spectrum of what they can look like. And and the complexities in terms of dealing with grievances. Some of them will be appropriate for an investigations process if you feel like you might want to take some kind of disciplinary action. Some will be more appropriate for a conflict resolution or a mediation process, because what we and sometimes even some of the more serious ones can lend themselves to that kind of process, might be more appropriate, because what we really need to do is I suppose preserve and improve a working relationship and give people an opportunity to sit down and talk to each other about, well, this is how I feel, this is how your behaviour's impacted me, and this is what I would like to see in the future. So yeah, a big broad, I suppose, environment in which we work.
Okay, I've got 1,000,001 questions to ask you, and I know we only have 5 minutes, unfortunately, so we might have to do a second interview at a later stage, but we have discussed during a masterclass, and I truly believe that the industry needs a professional like you, so it would be 100% worth doing. In terms of mediations within the workplace, do you find that employees lack the communication skills to communicate effectively?
A lot of the time, yes. And I think what that can come down to is, once you've got a bit of the old sort of hurt feelings on both sides, it becomes extraordinarily complex and difficult for people to speak to each other respectfully, to ask for what they need. They start to look at every interaction or every action from the other party through that lens, through the lens of, I feel like you don't like me because of the way you looked at me on Monday afternoon, or I know how you feel about me because of what you said about those type of people at drinks. And that lens ends up being applied over everything. And where mediation and conflict resolution comes in really, really handy is it assists people to lift that rock up and examine in a safe environment what is actually driving my reactions, what is driving my behaviours, what's driving my responses, what do I need to do differently.
Okay, and how long would that process take typically?
If it's a mediation process, that can look, usually it's the kind of thing that you can do in a day, perhaps 4 or 5 hours. It's a big chat, you know. But normally what we would do is do what's an intake conversation, an hour or two with the parties separately before you do that joint session, which is around about the 4 hours usually. Mediation isn't a silver bullet. It doesn't always solve everything. But even where it doesn't result in, say, a written agreement, what it does result in is an opportunity for people to express how they're feeling and what's been impacting them, in a way that investigations, whilst they serve another very important purpose, might not necessarily give individuals a chance to kind of face up to each other and apologise, which can be really, really powerful.
Yes, amazing. So I know that you can only speak from the Australian law, but I did some research based on the law within Australia around bullying. And there is I don't know if it's a clause in Melbourne, because there was an individual who committed suicide or chose to end their life as a result of bullying in the workplace. And it appears to me that each state is different in terms of the legalities around that. But what are some of the repercussions you're likely to see if you engage in those inappropriate workplace behaviours?
Look, they can range, and it depends on, I suppose, the forum in which we are operating. So if we're operating in an employment forum and an investigation is conducted and you're found to have been engaging in these kinds of behaviours, aside from the very significant and tragic impact that you've just talked to me about, probably the most serious outcome in terms of employment would be dismissal. You lose your job. Having said that, if and as you say, the legislation is going to differ state to state and certainly country to country. If various different types of workplace safety agencies become involved, it can be much more serious, you know, and it can be not just in terms of whoever's done the bullying, but it also starts to flow up to managers, directors, owners of companies. Because as I said earlier, the employer they have a responsibility. They have a legislative responsibility to create a safe workplace, just in the way that you would put up scaffolding if you're in a building site, because, and that needs to be safe with harnesses and whatnot. It's the same with bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, that whole piece. It at the end of the day, it boils down to it's an employer's responsibility. And the bare minimum that you need in order to be able to move towards ticking those boxes include things like a code of conduct, which all your staff understand and are aware of, policies around bullying and harassment and how it's, not appropriate, policies around discipline of staff and what that looks like. Those kinds of building blocks are the things that will assist you, at least, as I say, in a very rudimentary level, to ensure that you've got that policy framework in place to educate staff about what is and what is not tolerable in the workplace. But what it really needs to be backed up by is managerial action. And that means engaging in those difficult conversations, not prioritising performance over behaviours, not allowing or tolerating those kinds of, really problematic behaviours in the workplace to flourish, making sure that we're looking at things like nepotism. If we've got, the boss is employing their kids or their wife or whoever it might be, we're setting up an environment in which people can start to really take sides and and build these really unhealthy and problematic structures around themselves to prevent them from being exposed or to prevent them from being censured around some of the behaviours. So really it comes down to making sure that you've got your structures in place in terms of policies and a code of conduct, but that you're actually listening to your staff. You've got somewhere that staff can make a complaint. You must have a good complaints mechanism in place, and when people complain, you do need to listen to them and take appropriate action.
Well, I can certainly unpack that with you, maybe in a masterclass, because there's so many flaws within our industry with regards to the system and the reporting procedures. Kristie, thank you so much for your time. Do you want to just mention how people can find you? What's the best place? Yeah.
Sure thing. We've got a website, www.ontrackinvestigations.com.au. You can find me on LinkedIn, Kristie Walker, or ontrack investigations, and we're also on Instagram because we're pretty cool and hip. And we're on ontrack investigations on the Insta. So you can come at us any way you like.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to connecting again soon.
Not a worry. Thanks for having me, Corinne. Take care.